Welcome to session 3. Again, I just want to highlight some of the main issues that you'll be looking at in your reading and just draw these to your attention, talk about them a little bit. And in this session, we look at the barriers or the challenges to critical thinking that arise as we embark on the journey of developing critical thinking skills in our lives. And so we want to think, first of all, that good critical thinking requires a sound knowledge base, epistemology. And how we acquire knowledge, of course, there's a great deal of discussion, a great deal of debate about that. There are many ways that we acquire knowledge. Knowledge is information or experience we believe to be true. We believe it to be true, and for which we have justification or evidence. Evidentiary substance to our knowledge is really, really important. In fact, you know, the revolution in which for many years it was believed that the sun revolved around the earth, and then it was found out through evidence that actually the earth revolves around the sun. There's kind of the need for evidence in our thinking. And so we need to understand how knowledge is acquired, as well as having an awareness of the limits of human understanding and human reasoning. Our views of the world shape our understanding of truth and the ultimate sources of knowledge. So what do we understand to be true, and how did we come to that opinion? There are rationalists like the Greek philosopher Plato who claim that most human knowledge and truth derives simply from reason. Ratiocinative knowledge, we might call it. And then there are the empiricists who say that we gain knowledge through our senses, through sensory perception. Touch, taste, feel, and smell. And we call this empirical evidence. So do we gain evidence just by rational thinking, ratiocinatively, or do we gain it by sensory perception? Or maybe do we gain knowledge through both of those avenues? Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher known for the deontological theory, rejected both rationalism and empiricism. And he contended that reality is not a matter of reasoning or empirical evidence, but is dependent on the structure of our minds. And so it really comes down to how we view the world. This means we do not see reality as it is, but rather as our brain interprets it by structuring and processing incoming information. And I wanted to illustrate this for you in the sense that in my country, we would say, I want to put the shoes in the boot. In your country, you would say, or in this country, which is now my country, in Canada, we'd say, I want to put the shoes in the trunk. Well, if you said to me, I want to put the shoes in the trunk, I would think that you want to put the shoes in an elephant's nose, because from Africa, that's what we think. But if I say to you, I want to put the shoes in the boot, which to me is the trunk, you would say, I don't understand what you're saying. And so reality can be ordered by our perception and by the semantic domains that we put on words and on understanding certain issues and certain structures, as our brain interprets those by structuring and processing incoming information. So it's really important that we are clear on what we understand. Evidence is something that tends to prove or disprove a particular view. I've lived in Canada long enough to know that a trunk is not an elephant's nose, but it is the back of my car. And now when I say to somebody, I want to put the shoes in the trunk, they know what I mean. Evidence can come from a variety of sources, and as good critical thinkers, we must evaluate all evidence before we employ it in critical analysis. We need to gain as much evidence as we can before we make a decision. And so learning how to evaluate the credibility and accuracy of evidence is a key skill in critical thinking and logic. How do I know that the evidence I have is true? Our brains organize and interpret rather than directly record sensory perception. And so we organize and interpret things that come into our lives. Brussels sprouts, to me, are not a great vegetable, but that's my sensory perception. You may love Brussels sprouts. That's your sensory perception. As a result, direct sense experience, while widely relied upon, is not infallible. And sometimes we think that what we perceive is actually true because it's true to us. We need to understand that that's a very fallible reality, and that we need to examine that with evidence, with facts, with research. Memories are subject to influence from a range of factors. And that's why police officers, when they take evidence, try to get the testimony of more than one witness and try to correlate those testimonies, because our brains can often create false memories of events. And these false memories can be compelling and believable. We call this false memory syndrome. In fact, in the 2002 Beltway sniper case, the witnesses believed that the sniper was driving a white van when in fact he had been driving a blue car. Quite amazing, but that's what they remembered in their sensory perception. So we need evidence. There are two things that work against evidence and we need to be careful of. One is hearsay, and that occurs a lot. Hearsay evidence is evidence that is heard by one person and then repeated to other persons. Did you hear about Mayor Ford and what he did? Well, you just heard that from somebody, but is it true? Have you researched? Do you have the facts? Have you checked other sources? Have you spoken to the mayor himself? Or are you just simply taking hearsay evidence and believing that to be true? The other is anecdotal evidence, which is based on personal testimony, but is also unreliable due to the problems of inaccurate memory. And that's what we talked about in the case of the Beltway sniper. Good critical thinkers spend time researching claims and collecting information before drawing conclusions. And so we have some recommended research resources. Expert interviews, number 1. Number 2, dictionaries and encyclopedias. Number 3, library catalogs and scholarly journals. And you'll learn how to use the library here at UIT. And I would encourage you as much as possible to use the library and to look up scholarly journals and articles and government documents and internet sites. Of course, we have to be really careful about researching things on the internet, Wikipedia, because whilst they can be helpful, they can also be hugely detrimental in terms of the fact that they're not always representative of good evidence and good factual research. When doing research, take accurate notes, cite your sources. Don't ever say that an opinion that you found or facts that you found from someone else, don't ever claim those to be your own. It's good practice to refer to the person who did that research rather than to claim it as your own. That's unethical. Our minds are not like recording devices. Instead, our brains construct a picture of reality like an artist does, filtering our perceptions and filling in missing information. These processes result in a number of perceptual error predispositions, including distortion of objects, misperception of random data, memorable events error, and probability errors, self-serving biases, and self-fulfilling prophecies. Really, really important to think those through. A self-serving bias is when we say, as I do because I drink a lot of coffee, that coffee is a vegetable and vegetables are good for us, therefore coffee is good for us. We've also found out recently that coffee apparently is really good for our hearts, but also apparently really bad for our hearts. So one has to look at the evidence, study it, and we can often employ a self-serving bias to justify our position. One of the things that I loved, a friend when I was 30,000 feet above the earth, and we hit a tremendous amount of turbulence in the air. He saw me grip the handle of my seat, and he quoted this fact to me. He said, "Rob, I want you to know statistically, there is a greater chance of you being killed in a car crash than there is in you being killed in an airplane crash." Well, that was great to hear at 30,000 feet above the earth as we were going through turbulence that was quite rough. Social errors and biases. We have to understand, as Alfred Maher said in his book, The Nature of History, that law is sociologically determined, and we need to be really careful to understand that we even need to critique the society around us. Just because the majority says something is right or true doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And I've experienced this, as I said, in my country under apartheid, where the majority of people that had the power said this is right, it wasn't right. And we had to question that and critique it and understand it. And so we need to understand that we're social animals and we don't want to go against, many times, the social norm. But we need to understand and critique and understand even sometimes that the law can be wrong. And so we need to engage critically. Just because society says something is right doesn't make it right. Some examples of social errors include the one of us, one of them error, in which, hey, you're either one of us or you're one of them. And there's this great dichotomy between the us and the them. And perhaps we need to really understand and think through that people are people and they have value, an intrinsic value. We need to honor them even if we disagree with them. We can disagree in an agreeable way. Well, So many conflicts in our world today arise because of cultural groups saying you're not one of us, you're different. And of course we saw that in Rwanda between the Tutsi and the Hutu tribes, which was really conflagration over something that colonialism had created. There really wasn't a difference between those two, but the imperialists, the colonialists had decided to create this discrepancy between these two groups because it served their power base. And of course it created tremendous genocide and problems in the years ahead. And then there's this diffusion of responsibility, which says, well, somebody else will take care of this. Somebody else will attend to this. It's not my problem. And we saw this in 2009 when no one came to the aid of a hit-and-run victim in New York. And of course we have so many examples of this. But we need to critically think, is this my responsibility? And why isn't it my responsibility? And if I can help and I can avert harm, I have a responsibility to do that. Although knowledge is a crucial component of effective critical thinking, we must recognize that the sources of knowledge, reason and experience, are subject to distortion. It's really important to grasp that. As critical thinkers, we must be aware of these limitations and conduct research thoroughly with minds open to both supportive and contradictory evidence. If the research goes against what you hold to be true, you need to examine that and be flexible and open to realigning your thinking to what is actually factually true and evidentiary based and formed. We need to collect and analyze information to think critically. Hope that helps. Thanks so much.